What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over gamepads and fully functional input, so specifically on menus, but we are going to also do some logic in the game itself. So you can basically use your gamepad, or in this case my Xbox controllers, to fully control my game without using the mouse or the keyboard. So you can see I can do all this with the controller, go into versus, I can select my character, select my skin. Player 2 can come in, select their character, select their skin. We can press start to continue, and then you can pick your scene. Player 2 can also go around on this screen, although player 1 is the only one that matters for the level select at the current time. And then when we press start, we get started, and we can control our game like normal. So there we go. So let's get into it. This is going to be blueprint only, so nothing too hard on this one. This will be a fun one, I think. First of all, just a quick reminder, for anyone who is using the exact same method I am and using the tutorial series for all their logic, then you should know that make sure you disable is device for multiple players in the game mode. That way it's not looking for the keyboard. Remember, this will be determined automatically down the line, but for now, we have to make sure we set it to the appropriate value if we expect to use gamepads or keyboard. And for those that are new to the series, this is episode 47, so if you like what you see and you want to catch up on the entire series, I'll leave a link in the icon in the top right corner to the very first episode of this series. Okay, but anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Basically, we're just going to go through all of our screens and adjust logic to make sure that it works for gamepads. And we're going to add a few other controls that we didn't already have set up. That way, gamepads are supported by those functions as well. So first of all, let's start with the press any key screen. Now in here, the only real issue was you had to click into the screen itself, into the viewport, to be able to do anything. And when we did that, it would automatically skip, because all we were doing was playing the animation to make the key blink, the any key text, and then we were listening for input action. And if there was any key was pressed, including a mouse click, then it would open up the main menu. There's something you can do called set input mode game in UI. And you can read this if you want. But essentially what these input modes do is they determine what is looking for controls. So essentially, will this screen be looking for controls before it is focused? And it essentially focuses this widget. So we don't have to go and click on it and trigger it. So just to show you, I can, without clicking on it, you can see my mouse is still above the screen. I can press A and go to the main menu. So all you have to do is grab a player controller. I think getting player controller 0 is actually really safe here, because unless you need player 2 to do it or you want them to be able to do it, you're not obviously going to be doing any sort of multiplayer or online logic by the time you're at the press any key screen, so I think it's very possible to just start with player controller 0 and just leave it like that. Then you can drag off of that and hit set input mode and do game in UI. I do game in UI. You could just do UI only and play around with it, but game in UI is the best for this in my opinion, because it does allow the UI to respond to the user input if there's no game actions. And if we want to do anything in the game that requires actions, like if we're using render targets and we want to be able to play certain animations when we select them, which is more complicated than what we're doing now, but you may want this. So just thinking forward a little bit, you may want to leave it like this. But not the end of the world either way. And then you need a widget to focus. So I just get a reference to self, because we want to focus the any key widget. Okay, and then you just drag your white line through like usual, and you're good to go. The rest of the stuff is fine. Hide during capture means when you click on the viewport, if you click on it with your mouse, then it will be invisible. It will be essentially hidden to the user, so they can't see their cursor. And mouse lock mode refers to if mouse is going to be locked in the viewport, meaning, I'll show you that too. So if I were to click on this, you see how it's hidden right now? And how it's, the mouse lock mode is set to do not lock. If it was locked, I wouldn't be able to leave this window, but you can see my mouse goes left and right, in and out of the window. Okay, so just nothing too important, but I just wanted to teach you that while we're using this node. That's the only thing we're doing on the press any key screen. But that's just a little thing. You need to do that if you want to have full gamepad support. Otherwise, you're going to have to click on your viewport every time. And this is especially bad in builds of the game. So, okay. Next, we need to cover our main menu screen. This is actually going to take up probably the bulk of the work this time around. And it's not even that hard. It's actually just the same stuff that we're doing in the character select and level select screen. So if you watch that series, it should be pretty easy, but we do have to essentially copy that logic over. And I've only done it for player 1 because I don't feel like it's necessary to have anything for player 2 doing there either. Even if you have multiple players signed in at this point, I still feel like it's not necessary to have both players have control of the main menu. So let's get started. In the construct, I'm going ahead and setting up my listen for input actions like I always do. For those that aren't aware, menu up P1, menu down P1, and menu confirm P1 are referring to different input actions that I can do on in the project settings, which is a good time to go over this. So before we were actually doing all the menu flow with the mouse, and or up to the character select and level select screen, we were doing everything with the mouse. So we're going to have to access these input actions. But let me show you what I've added. I've left all the ones open that I've added. So when it comes to if we're pressing, if we're working for player 1 or player 2, if we're working on the keyboard, then we have P1 and P2, just like we have in-game. Like we have exceptional attack P1 and P2. You'll notice that P2 has a key but doesn't have a gamepad input, and that's because the gamepad input just gets referenced and says, okay, if I press gamepad right shoulder, this is what I want. You only have to do P1 and P2 to differentiate them if you're using one input device like we are for the keyboard. So it's the same case here. If I'm just worrying about moving left or moving right and moving up and down, none of your P2s have to change. They stay the keys that it would take for player 2 on the keyboard to adjust this. So since we're using the gamepad in this case, just set up your controls. For me, I selected gamepad left thumbstick left, left thumbstick right, left thumbstick up, and left thumbstick down. You can use X and Y axis values as well, and that will let you don't have to like, so right now, if I were to play this, I do have to press it every time. I can't just hold it. You can check for is button held and things like that, but the issue is if you do use the X and Y axis, then your controls will fly over the screen. So you have to do some extra logic if you want to be able to hold and move multiple things, probably like a short delay, and better yet, you'd want to see how long it was held to do that. But for now, we're just going to do this, so you have to press it every time. That's fine. You could also add your D-pad in here, which is probably a good idea. You can just always add more by hitting the little plus so you can have as many as you want. I've also added a confirm button, a change outfit button, and then a proceed and a return button. So confirm is my face button bottom, which if you look at your face buttons, which are the main buttons on your controller, so on Xbox it's A, X, Y, and B, the bottom button is A, so confirm is my A button. And then I've added change outfit, which I'm making X. I've added gamepad special right for proceed and face button right for return. So face button right is B, and return is essentially going to return us to the previous screen we were on. So if we don't want to be on that screen anymore, we hit B and we go back a screen, which I'll show you that in a second. And then proceed, I can just press start. That's what special is. It's the two buttons in the middle, select and start. Or I guess it's considered back and start on the Xbox 360 controller like I'm using right now. But gamepad special right is the start button. So now, if I were to play, I can actually go into versus, yay, switch my colors, proceed, and then I can actually press back and go back to this screen. And then get control over my guys again, and yay, and then we go back, and you can keep doing this. So you can go back and forth between your screens, and go all the way back to the main menu. So we have true menu flow. And those are all the action mappings that I'm adding for today, but it is important that you do add them. So, okay, in our main menu screen, we just need a way to go between our different selections. So, again, if you watch the character select screen, if you haven't, I will go ahead and put a link in the iCard right here, just because the logic is basically going to be the same as this in the main menu. So if you plan on doing all of it, The character select and level select are more complicated than the main menu, so if you're interested, you'll probably want to watch that before you watch this. But otherwise, in construct, I'm just listening for input action. You just type listen for input action. And then you put in the action name here. So for example, menu up P1, menu down P1, menu confirm P1. You can put whatever you want. This determines what controls it's looking for. And then the event type is pressed. That's when we press it. You don't need to consume. That consumes input. It disables you from doing input on other things, which can be very helpful. In this case, we're not going to use it. And then the callback is perhaps the most important part here. You drag off, you type add custom event, and then you rename the event to whatever you want. The event name doesn't matter, just as long as you know what it is. I called it P1 menu up, P1 menu down, P1 menu confirm. And what these do are these, whenever this action mapping is pressed, then it's going to call this event and do this logic. So you set it up in the construct, and it doesn't have to continuously check. I mean, technically it does. It waits until you press a button, and then checks to see if it fits with the action name. But you don't have to do this on tick or anything. You just set it up on construct, and it does that for you. Okay. Now, I am going to be covering the logic in here again, even though I just basically copy and pasted from the character select and level select, because I did kind of get rid of some of the logic as well that wasn't necessary. So it is a little bit shorter this time around. So I'll go ahead and cover everything, just so you don't have to look between different episodes to see what's going on. But then it's important that you know we have a few functions here. We have move selection border. So they're different because move selection refers to what actual index we were using. We're not using Unreal's default navigation system for menus. So when you see that the blue border invisible background button, like I have here, that's the option I'm on, right? Might not be the prettiest, but it works in terms of showing you what option we have selected. So move selection is when I press up or down, I go to a selection, a different selection, okay? And move selection border is what actually makes it show up like I'm moving the selection. So you can see that the background that's moving with the input is because of move selection border. Confirm selection is when we hit A. It determines the logic of what we want to do next. And clear path selection makes sure that every option that we are not currently on or highlighting does not have any sort of logic tied to it. Like if I'm not on the versus button, I don't want the versus button to be in the highlighted state. So let's start with move selection. We'll get into the rest of the stuff in construct after this. So move selection takes in what I call a direction. It takes in essentially a -1 or 1. And what we do is we determine if we should switch up the location of where the index we are is at. So what I mean by that is we have a variable, current P1 selection, starts at 0. It's just an integer, so add a variable, select your type as integer. You can call it current P1 selection or even just current selection because I'm not going to have two players on the main menu. And all we're doing is taking that value and adding it with the direction. So if current P1 selection is 0, and you can see as we move up, it's -1 direction. As we move down, it's +1 direction. So if we press down, we're adding 1. Our new current P1 selection is 2. So we'll go to index 2. Or excuse me, we technically start on index 1 in this case. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So we'll start on 1. When we add them, I also do a check to make sure it's greater than -1 and less than max selections. Max selections I set up to be the number of selections that we have. So we have 4 on our main menu. Not indices, but actual selections. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 selections. And then we, again, also, we have the ability to go up and down. So like this, when I press down, this is +1, +1, -1, -1, +1, -1. Right? So that's how that's working. We just make sure it falls within that range before moving the current P1 selection. You could, of course, check if it's greater than that range and then loop it around, wrap it around. So if I press down at the bottom, I end up at the top. And then if both those conditions are true, though, we set the new current P1 selection to the appropriate value, which is the return of the add node. can see it's getting set here. Then I call move selection border so that the selection border also follows our new location. Now this looks like a lot, but it's not. It's actually one node that's just really expanded because there's so many options here. So again, I copied this right from the character select. So that's why you have some extra indices that aren't being used here in the switch case. And I'm doing that on purpose just because if I add more, like I'm going to add an exit button and perhaps like an online button and things like that. But move selection border actually takes in an integer selection. So you can add another input and do integer. Same with how you can do it for direction. I don't think I explained that. You can just add a new input here and then make it direction integer. So current P1 selection gets put into move selection border, and we're just going to move the border to where the current selection is. Simple enough. What we're doing here is we're making sure all the buttons we have. So I have 4 buttons in my designer view: story, arcade, versus, and practice. I'm making sure they're all variables. See, this option right here is variable. And they are, so I can access them, which means I can set their style. So I grab all 4 of them: story, arcade, versus, and practice. Okay, so you can drag off of any of your buttons, hit set style. You can use the appearance. I just personally use the variable and then break it just because there's less stuff I have to split. But you can right click and split these and then just split widget normal again. And then you set things as you need them. So for one, we need the image to be my P1 current selection border. I mean, you don't have to make it this. This happens to be the same image that I use for my character select. So it's literally just a box that has blue around it. Again, you don't have to use that, of course. That doesn't matter, but that's the image I'm using. And then I actually choose to draw it as a box because then it won't really wrap with the size of the image. It'll stay on the outside like we want. And then you can leave everything else alone. I'm just showing you that they're the same thing. And then you actually just have to do that for all 4. It's the exact same logic. I even use the same image and the same style, the draw as box here. But you just do it one for each button. And then once I'm done with that, so this switch is just, it takes in your current P1 selection, sees if you're on 0, 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, depends on what button you are. Depending on what button you are, you go and you set the style for that button, and then you clear past selections. Clear past selections is what determines, it removes all the other ones from the pool basically, and it says we don't want you to look like you are being highlighted right now, or we don't want you to look like you are being selected right now. So good here. That's the rest of the logic. So let's go into clear past selections, and then we can finish up what was in construct and go on to the next section. So clear past selections. Again, same logic as before in the character and stage select. But essentially what we do is we check and see what current P1 selection is on. I just basically check if it's not equal to this. Now here it's not so important. You could just get the switch statement value and clear the rest. In modes where you do have 2 players, you do want to check both of them, which can get a little bit trickier, as we did in the character select. But I still use the same method because at least I'm staying consistent and I know exactly how to access them. So I check and say, okay, current P1 selection not equal to 0. Nope, if it's not equal to 0, then we clear selection 1. So I have these events in the event graph. This is below construct. The way you add these is you just add custom event, like we did up top, and then you can call them clear selection 1, clear selection 2, 3, and 4. And then guess what? We grab the button of selection 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we set the style. You can leave box and all that, but literally just set the image to be none. This will replace the asset. Now, if you do have an asset you want behind it that's not the selected one, then obviously set it back to the default as opposed to the one we were setting it to. Okay, so then you still have to make sure you go to the next box anyway. So 1 goes to 2, but if it's also we are on 0, we just want to skip clearing the selection and then go to the other options. Let me check, is it equal to 1? This actually checks not equal to 1. So if it's not equal to 1, we want to clear 1. If it is equal to 1, we're going to skip it. If it's not equal to 2, we're going to clear 2. Otherwise, we're going to skip it. And if it's not equal to 3, we're going to clear 3, and then we're going to skip it. And you can do this for as many buttons as you want. But that's how we have our logic set up. Now, you can see that this is everything in the main menu. Let's cover the last 2 nodes you got here. So in construct, after my listen for input action, I do call move selection border without actually moving the selection, and just set it to be selection 0. Essentially what this does is it makes it so our user doesn't have to move their controls around the main menu to be able to get the border to pop up. We just basically force the border to occur at the first index, which is index 0. And that way you get your little border selected on story mode. Lastly, and most importantly for this whole episode actually, on what we're doing here to get multiplayer menu support, I'm creating a player in the main menu. Now, you won't want to do this by default like I'm doing here when, down the line. We'll want to have something called profiles, which we can use to determine who's who and things like that. And of course, if you're playing on a platform, you use that profile to determine like what profile they're on that platform. For example, if it's profile 1, maybe that's your Xbox account. If it's profile 2, maybe it's your friend's Xbox account, something like that, Steam, whatever. So the way Unreal does multiplayer, if you're using their system, it's quite easy. You just call a create player node, literally type create player, select it, and then you can hit the little down arrow and choose spawn player controller. I do use spawn player controller here, and I leave controller ID at -1. It's not setting it to -1, it's setting it to the next available ID, which should be ID 1. If we only had 2 players, then player 1 is going to be index 0, player 2 is going to be index 1. So controller ID of 1. But I just leave it -1, let the engine do the work. We're creating it here as opposed to when we spawn them in the game mode, simply because that allows us to kind of control what they can do on the menu. And it's going to be more useful. Again, we can figure out their profile and save out data for them separately. We don't want to just spawn them when they're in the game, because if they want to have their own data, then they should be able to do that. You don't only want them to exist when a game is going. Okay, so that's the main menu screen done. Now the other ones are going to be quite simple in comparison with that. But I do want to go over the change that this requires us to make in the default game mode BP. So everything in the default game mode BP can stay except your spawn players function. If you've been following the series, then you'll know what this is. This is where we are choosing if it's multiple players on one device, like if it's a keyboard, so we want to spawn them, or if we want to create a player here and possess them. Well, since we're now spawning the player controller earlier on in the menus, we don't want to spawn a new one when the game mode starts. So what we actually want to do is get all actors of class and select your player controller class. You can always cast to a different player controller down the line, but for now, when you call create player, it creates a basic player controller. And then type get, and actually get index 1. Now, yes, this is a little bit forced, but considering we're only going to have 2 players ever playing at the same time, even if you're doing tag team battles or something like that, you'll still only have 2 actual players. So you can pretty much do this safely. If you want to be really, really safe, check if this is valid before using it, and or even have an index to the player controller that you want to use instead of hard-coding one. But for now, it's really not necessary. And then just drag off of that player controller, type possess, and then drag in the pawn that we spawned, which is, again, it goes back to game mode logic. I won't go and cover all of it now. But if you're doing this without following the series, that's okay too. Just make sure you don't spawn a new player in the world. Or if you do, don't spawn a player controller with them, and then just possess the player controller or use the player controller that was spawned during the menu to possess the new pawn that you spawn. That's how that will work. Okay? So that's all that done. I'm just going to move this here so it's in order. Now we just have to cover our character select screen and our level select screen. I accidentally moved my window. There we go. The character select screen is going to be pretty much the same thing. I'm adding 2 sets of logic here. And don't worry, this looks like a lot. It's not. It's actually the exact same logic that we used to go from the character select screen to the stage select screen. I just moved it over. So you're not going to have to add all that. There is one thing you're going to have to add to both character select and level select. And I'm also going to add a few more listen for input actions. So let's start with the new stuff we're going to add. And if you want to make sure that you can actually both control different things on the main menu, like say in the character select, player 1 and player 2, they control different boxes and they control their own character and change skins. To do that, we want to check essentially their input bindings, but we don't want to sit here and force it to be where like 2 of the inputs are gamepad left thumbstick, because if you do that, if say menu left P1 and menu left P2 both had left thumbstick, then when you pressed it on one controller, it would actually trigger it for both of them, which isn't good. So what we actually need to do here is we need to get the player controller that we want and then check their specific inputs. Is it a little bit hacky? Yeah, it's a little bit hacky, but it's not really too bad because, I mean, this is only going to be relevant during the character select screen and during the level select screen. And we're only checking for like their basic inputs. They just need to be able to move left, right, up, down, confirm, and do any other things you can do with your character. So like change outfit. So let me show you how this works. The same way we were updating our spawning in the game mode where we got all actors of class, grabbed player controller, and then got index 1. You can do this again here, but then drag off of this and hit promote to variable. Make it player 2 PC, player 2 player controller. That's what I made it. And once you do that, then I do this on tick, but you don't really have to. You could do it just by checking when any button was pressed. But again, it's just our menus. Tick and checking for some input key pressed is going to be okay. I think this is by far the easiest and quickest way to do it. And it really doesn't sacrifice any sort of performance or anything like that. So just go ahead and type event tick if you don't already have it somewhere. Add it. Then what you want to do is grab your player 2 PC reference. Again, feel free to make sure this is valid. It's very good practice to make sure these are valid. I know they're valid the way I set it up, but it's not always going to be the case that it is valid. You know, it could be different, especially as we get into making player profiles and things like that. For now, I'm just going to leave it like this. I will almost definitely update it throughout the series. But player 2 PC, so grab that new variable we set up right here. And then you're going to copy the same logic over and over again for all the inputs you need to check for player 2. So drag off of your input and type, was input key just pressed? Now, there are a few of them. Like if you drag off and type input, you do have a few options. Like is input key down and things like that. But these was input key just pressed will determine if you go from up to down. Like if you're pressing and then, or if you're not pressing then you're pressing, or if you're pressing and then you release. So it will only trigger once. It will trigger the change. It won't trigger all the time. So this is good if you just want to have them press it and not hold it. Again, like the main menu, if you let them hold it, they will probably fly across the character select screen and it'll make it very not easy to control. And there's definitely ways to adjust that, so you know we can even cover that. But for now, was input key just pressed? It lets you put in the key. If you want to be very good about this, you could actually go ahead and make key structures that have the keys that you want in these functions, in these nodes. And then when you do that, you won't have to go and change these in a hard-coded manner in the character select. If that makes sense. And if it doesn't, it's okay. We'll get more into that when we get into adding D-input controllers. I'll show you what I'm referring to. But just select the key and search for what you want, like you're making action mapping. Left thumbstick, left, and then do that for all these. Basically do a branch. If it's true, if this return value is true, then go ahead and call the corresponding function. Since this is player 2 pressing left, we want to do the player 2 menu left function, which this is stuff I've set up. It uses that move selection method we used in the main menu just earlier, but on the character selection screen. So I won't be covering this because this goes very in depth with all the character select stuff. But again, you can watch that character select episode if you want to catch up with that. But you can probably get a good idea for what it does. Okay, but either way, whether it's true or false, again, we want to go to the next check regardless. So then we check right. If it's true, we call P2 menu right. And either way, then we check the next one. Up, P2 menu up. Down, P2 menu down. Face button bottom, which is A, menu confirm. And face button left, change outfit. So that's what's happening on tick, and that's just calling the appropriate functions if the second player controller, which is our second player that's plugged in, happens to press the buttons that they need to press to perform the logic. Now, we also need to add a few more input actions, just because we never had these before. Proceed and return. So I was actually using the mouse to press these buttons before. You see I have a back and continue button. I didn't disable them, they still work, but that's how I was getting around before. But now I can just press the keys, or excuse me, the buttons on the controller to do that. So remember, I added a proceed P1, return P1. I never added a P2, feel free to. But listen for input action, type in the names, and add callbacks. The callbacks I made more specific for this because proceed P1 and return P1 I'm going to use all throughout the menu, so I want to know exactly where I'm going. If I'm on the character select screen and I proceed, I'm going to the level select screen. If I'm on the character select screen and I return, I'm going to the main menu. And again, don't worry about this. This is not very complicated. We are actually going to be doing the logic that we were doing on the continue button. You can actually see the continue button is here, and the back button is here. These are when we click them, okay, these two nodes. And then I've added the callbacks to also do this logic. So you can still use the mouse if you want, if it's better for debugging or if you want to have mouse support in your game. So I am going to be updating the logic here. This stuff is all the same. You don't have to change anything with this. But I do update the logic so that the continue button here does the check. Is stage select screen up, which is just a boolean that we have in here that determines if we've already gone to the stage select screen. Now this already existed in previous episodes, but I wasn't doing this branch here. So basically, if we're going to the level select screen, we want to check and see if the level select screen is already up before we do it. Otherwise you get multiple instances, and I realized I was actually doing that. Now you wouldn't realize it because of the fact that we were pressing back with the mouse. So it's like, okay, you press back and you go back, it makes sense. But when you have the controller, you can continue to hit the same button over and over. I can keep hitting start, and I can actually keep creating different level select screens, which I don't want to do. So I want to make sure that the level select screen is not up, or the stage select screen is not up, that boolean, and then do the logic to spawn the screen and set our characters and stuff. Then, same with the return to main menu, I actually want to check if the stage select screen is up, because since I'm listening for this input action and I'm not destroying the character select screen widget, then it actually will fire on both the character select and the stage select. Now this is actually what the consume input is good for, and it would help me avoid that. But because I want to make it a seamless transition between character select and level select, then all I do is on the back button, or if we press B, to return the main menu, I check if stage select screen is up. If it is up, I actually just set this to false and don't do any of the logic to remove the character select screen. And then if it's not up, then we go back to the main menu. So again, this is the logic that already existed before, but now I'm adding these three nodes. And then this logic already existed before. I'm just adding these two nodes. Okay, simple enough there. There's a few other things I want to tell you that aren't actually required, but just things I think that make them better. In confirm selection, again, this is one of those things where when I was confirming selection before, I had to use the mouse, so I could just hide the buttons and focus the stage selection widget, and you would actually control the stage selection widget, so you couldn't change characters. But since we are actually pressing A to do that now, and again, we're not consuming input on the level select screen widget, it would actually change your character or spawn more than one and things like that. So you can just go ahead and add a check at the beginning of confirm selection to make sure the stage select screen is not up. I didn't actually do that for the change outfit, but you probably should do the same thing. Just make sure that stage select isn't up before changing outfit. Although maybe you want them to be able to do it. It's not a huge deal. However, we actually set the logic to where we set the outfit right here when we continue from the character select to the level select. So you probably should stomp that. So I can update that, but it's literally you just add that boolean and do a branch. Okay, and that's character select. The last thing we need to do is level select screen. And honestly, you're not going to have to do much of anything. Basically, you're going to do the same logic that we did for the character select. In construct, I get all actors of class player controller, get index 1, promote it to variable, player 2 PC. On tick, I go through and I set all my functions. So player 2 PC, if they press left, we do P2 menu left, P2 menu right if they press right, up, P2 menu up, down, P2 menu down. Face button bottom is confirm, although technically player 2 doesn't have any say over what stage we're going to right now. And then go ahead and add your listen for input action. So proceed P1 is start match, return P1 is return to level select, which actually is the wrong thing. I just realized that. Should be return to character select right here. There you go, updated. So, like usual, proceed is going to follow the same logic that the continue button does. In this case, I actually don't have to change anything. So if you press the continue button or you press start, it's going to do the same logic. Same with the back button when we're on the level select. If you press the back button, or if you press B, you're going to do the same logic. The only difference in this case is we were actually changing the way we were setting some variables. So what I mean by that is we were in reset values to default. We were actually resetting our stage select screen up, which is good. But when we're not using the buttons again, and we're using we're not using the buttons in the widget, and we're instead using the buttons on our controller, that can cause an issue because instead of just pressing B and getting out of here, we were pressing B and then we were actually returning out of the levels or the character select as well and going straight to the main menu. So what I've done is you saw that if the stage select screen was up and we pressed B, then we set the stage select screen up to be false here. So we no longer need to set it when we press B on the stage select screen. That would be redundant and actually counterproductive. But if you're using the mouse to press the button, you still want to perform this logic. So I've taken it out of the reset values to default. I've placed it right here in case you still want to use the button with the mouse. But then if we're using the beat button, the back button on our controller, we want to skip that step. Okay, so this is in our main menu screen, and I never showed you the confirm selection before. There was a reason to that. I probably should have mentioned that I was going to show it later, but it's okay. So the confirm selection just takes in a selection integer. Of course, just add an integer, call it selection. Set the confirmed P1 selection, which is different from current P1 selection. Confirmed is what we pressed A on. Also starts at 0. It gets set when we call confirm selection, which gets set in the listen for input action when we confirm. Okay? So then we do a switch on it, and then here's where we can do all of our logic to determine what's going to happen. So if we press index 2 here, this is actually the versus button. So if I press the versus button, I want to set the main menu to be invisible, spawn the character select screen widget, add it to the viewport, and then remove the main menu screen from the parent. So the only difference here, and I don't know if I updated it in the mouse controls. I actually still have the mouse controls down here, just in case I want to use them. Okay, I did update it. Before, in the last episode where we were doing full menu flow, the issue here is we were hiding the main menu but not getting rid of it. Because I was like, oh, we don't have to get rid of it, then we can keep it. But you don't really have any persistent data that you need to keep on the main menu. So if you do that, it's just going to complicate some things, and you're going to have to do some more of that logic that we did here, where you're like, oh, is this screen up? So to avoid that, all I do is I set it to be invisible so that when we spawn the character select screen widget and add it to the viewport, you can't see the main menu. So it's not like you're getting some sort of fighting between these two screens. And then once this widget is up, I just remove the main menu screen from the parent. Same with the confirm selection. So there you go. So it makes sense as to why we want to do that now. All right, guys. And I believe that is it. So now we can play our game. And I actually clicked the mouse there out of habit, and I don't even need to. So we can play our game, we can press versus and change our skin. And then we can go up and pick another character and change our skin. Just like that. We can continue. We can pick the stage we want. So there we go, guys. You can select your stage and do all that stuff, and you're good to go. It feels really good to have some menu controls in here, as well as full like player 1, player 2 controls on the gamepad. It just makes it feel a lot more like a game. And quite frankly, the gamepad controls feel pretty solid. Thank you so much for watching this episode, guys. It's a really fun one. I'm glad to have this done, and I hope this helped you set up gamepad input for your menus and your game. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for the channel than anything else you can do, and it'll help you keep updated with all the updates to this series, which is pretty exciting. We're getting quite far along now. I want to give a huge shout out to all my Patreon and YouTube membership subscribers. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you for continuing to support me and support these tutorials. It makes it a lot easier for me to make them, and I just really appreciate it. So thanks. Thank you so much. I am gonna leave the talking to the screen. That way you guys can see everyone as opposed to me rambling on. But I will leave a link in the description if you want to join the membership, if that's easier. There's also a join button below the video if you're interested. It gets you perks like getting these templates for free and things like that. So anyway, thank you guys so much. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I have it in the description, and if you click the link, you can join, and we'll be happy to help you with any problems you have, or you can just come hang out with us. That's also fun. And lastly, guys, you can come join us on Twitch if you want to come hang out. Twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. We usually play some Dark Souls related games. In this case, we were playing Demon Souls, and we're figuring out the next game we want to play for Friday. We were playing Resident Evil games, but we played through pretty much all of them that we can play through. So, alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye, everyone.